gonna send you a nasty text. About timeliness is next to godliness.
Your job is always
Just
on
kidding you.
Is there, are you opening on that? Is that how that's?
Yeah.
Well, I tried going down
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do
Yeah.
Melody
the
first.
hall they're working
And then
on
I'll
first.
and then you are up.
It was
Okay,
amazing.
I'm after you, all
Yeah.
right, that's what I was kind of guessing.
told me to get out there.
Yeah, but essentially talk from the report, so,
Okay,
you know, so,
Okay.
or highlight some things maybe, better ways.
perfect.
Yeah, sorry.
But you got my email, I'm not, like, because it is right, the draft.
Oh, I got you,
Like,
got you.
so I think it's okay to do that, but I would look at them like just the way you said it, because that was like a draft.
Gotcha. I wanted to clarify that too, so I'm glad
Yeah,
you said that.
perfect. Okay, seems fine.
How are you? Also,
And I just, very careful about how we reference this draft report, so it doesn't have to be an exhibit or part of the record.
Doesn't have to be what?
An exhibit or part of the record, since it's a draft. The final report will come out. But we don't want people to get
Who's doing the final report? What's, you
the
gotta do?
committee. Yes.
Oh, we have to vote on it.
Yeah, and we'll finalize any changes and then we'll do the recommendations and stuff, but I'm just gonna be really careful.
When will we do the final report?
It's due December 31st.
I think so.
So we gotta have a second,
Yes.
then make our recommendations.
Yes.
Or do it next year.
The report has to have recommendations in it by December 31st, that's statutorily required. You're gonna have to do something. Yes. So I'm just being sensitive to the references.
It's been a long week.
With the commissioner and my senior accountant, some of they're aware of what's in there, they can speak to it.
That's what you gotta do.
Kowalski's not coming. Kowalski.
Who's coming?
He's not coming. Linehan's
Now
on
we're
the
down to
way.
5, right?
Yeah, Linehan's on the way.
And Patty, who's the other Darcy?
Yes.
There's Patty Van Brooks, Bill.
Monday. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Nancy Brooks is on the way.
You're not the only one.
You weren't first.
Hold on, products, Jack, that's good. Okay, would you put that on my desk?
Yep.
On the desk drawer. Is Linda in?
Yep.
What happens? Talk to Jen. Know what she was getting thrown in.
Most of this is
I told her to haul ass and get out here by 11.
Alice is on her way.
What?
Alice is on her way.
Yep.
I think that's all I
Take a
had.
purse or?
No. Thank you.
Her and I are usually in the parking lot at the same time. It's early today. The core office.
Still corn?
QUO. Technically, we don't have to have a quorum, I think it's for here.
Says it in the rules.
What?
Says it in the rules.
For a hearing? For exec session. An exec session you do. For a, we looked that up for a hearing, you do not. I would have to take
tell them how it's not the final version and stuff.
Well, I'm not even gonna mention it.
Oh, you're not?
No, because I don't want it to have to go to an exhibit you recommend.
So don't mention it when you tell them. So we have to have a report by December 31st.
Yes. Olmsted is gonna come talk about those partners and talk about those are the different things that you promote. Dr. Fritz is gonna talk about SBT and Dr. Plucker's gonna talk about excellence in teaching. Ralph's gonna talk about camp assistance, and then Cody Kalash will start with school board's perspective.
Because he oversees these.
Yes,
He oversees.
yes,
He
yes.
what do you call it? He,
Their agencies oversee our agencies.
manages the funds. Distributes the funds. I think we're going to get started. Senator Pansy Brooks is in the building, I know that. I met with her this morning, so I'm sure she'll be here. We're having a couple hearings today. The first one is going to be on, presented by, on the Early Childhood Education Grant Program. It's a statutory requirement that every 2 years a report is given by the Nebraska Department of Education to the Education Committee, so we will start with that. All the rules are in place. Please shut your cell phones off. It's invited testimony today because we want to get to the facts. And we've invited even the second one on the entities, the government entities that oversee the programs, and because we're limited for time. And we just want the numbers and the facts and how the programs are going, because especially on the second hearing, every 5 years we are required, the Education Committee, to look at the lottery funds and how we distribute them in the programs. And the last year of the present 5 years is June 31st, 2021. So we need to address it this year. We have to prepare a report to the legislature on a lottery study every year. Every 5 years, excuse me. And Nicole's been working on that, but it has to be approved by the committee, so we won't be releasing any study yet, but we have to have it done by December 31st. This is the part of that process on the second hearing. So let's get started with Melody Hobson, Administrator, Nebraska Department of Education, Office of Early Childhood, to report on the Early Childhood Education Grant Fund for 2017-18.
Good morning. Chairman Grunden, members of the Education Committee. As you said, my name is Melody Hobson. I'm the Administrator of the Office of Early Childhood Education at the Nebraska Department of Education. And thank you for the opportunity to discuss the 2017-18 State Report of Early Childhood Education in Nebraska Public Schools.
Spell your name.
Okay. Melody, M-E-L-O-D-Y, H-O-B-S-O-N. On December 31st, the Early Childhood Programs at a Glance report was submitted to the legislature. This report provides an overview of demographics and outcomes of the school year of the school district and ESU operated early childhood programs, birth to kindergarten, for the 2017-18 school year. There's been exponential growth in the number of programs operated by school districts and educational service units. In the 2004-5 year, there were 32 public programs that NDE Early Childhood monitored. By 17-18, that number had grown to 220 school districts and ESUs. During the 17-18 year, 20,058 children were served in these programs. This represents children in preschool classrooms for approximately children age 3 to kindergarten entrance. Sixpence, birth to 3 classrooms and home visiting programs. Children receiving home-based early intervention and special education services. And Head Start programs that are either offered by school districts and ESUs or in classrooms that are collaboratively operated by a Head Start agency and a school district. 74% of the children had experienced one or more of the following risk factors. They were receiving early childhood special education or early intervention services. They lived in families with incomes that qualified them for free reduced lunch, or they lived in homes where spoken English was not the primary language. Additionally, 64% of the children were white, 21% were Hispanic, and 6% were Black. This report also presents information about the quality of the program serving children and the outcomes of the children being served by school districts and ESUs. All programs covered by this report are expected to be of high quality. Requirements for continued operation are detailed in Title 92 of Nebraska Administrative Code, Chapter 11, which we lovingly refer to as Rule 11. Evaluation and quality assurance are measured in several ways. While the NDE doesn't have the capacity to go into every classroom and observe and measure the quality of every classroom, selected classes are observed using either an environment rating scale or the classroom assessment and scoring system. The classrooms serving children birth to age 3 were part of the Sixpence Early Childhood Sixpence program, which you may know as the Early Childhood Education Endowment Program. Every Sixpence classroom met the quality benchmark for social, emotional, behavioral support. These domains are crucial for optimal growth and development of infants and toddlers. In the preschool classroom, 70% of classrooms observed received good to excellent scores in the areas of quality adult-child interactions. These areas are highly correlated with child growth and learning in multiple domains. The quality of home visiting programs in Sixpence is measured by the Home Visiting Rating Scale's adaptive and extended version. 92% of the home visits observed actively included and engaged family members in the activities of the home visits. This is important because while the home visitor may be with the child for an hour or 2 a week, the families are constant presence in the children's lives, and they can implement the strategies learned from the home visitor for growth and learning throughout the week. All programs operated by schools and ESUs measure child outcomes. In other words, they measure the growth and learning. And in school age, we call that achievement. We don't generally use that term, birth to 5, although when you do see a child who's 2 sharing with somebody, that is quite an achievement. The measure that Nebraska uses is called My Teaching Strategies Gold. It is designed to measure children's skills and abilities from birth through 3rd grade, although in Nebraska, we only require school districts to use it for children birth to kindergarten entrance age. Using the gold, teachers learn to observe children while they are engaged either in routines, in activities, or in play throughout the day. The teachers document their observations and then score the child based on a norm scale. Gold uses the term widely held expectations to indicate whether children's skills and abilities are appropriate for their age. For children birth to age 2, 93% of the children met or exceeded widely held expectations across all developmental areas during the spring observation period. This is the last reporting period before the end of the school year when the children have had the benefit of the full year. For children aged 3 to 5, 89% of children met or exceeded widely held expectations across all developmental areas. In summary, approximately 15% of children birth to kindergarten are served by a program provided by public schools or ESUs. The quality of most of the programs is high, and a vast majority of the children are growing and learning appropriately. We at the NDE are working with school districts and ESUs to continually improve the quality of the programs and to ensure that, as a state, we are improving the way we teach and guide children's growth and learning. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Walls.
Thank you, Chairman Gurney. 64% of the children were white, 21% were Hispanic, and 6% Black. Is there a reason why there's such a big gap between those percentages? And
the programs are divided, across the state. So, there are some places where I would say that the percentages are reversed. In areas where we have, high Hispanic populations, we know that there are programs that have, a very high percentage of children there. It doesn't quite mirror the demographic of the state, but it's pretty close, and we do tend to serve a greater percentage of children with minority backgrounds.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Pansing Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman Grody. I'm surprised because I don't think it mirrors the demographic of the state. I thought that the number of Hispanic and people of color was more in Nebraska in the 6 to 10% range or something like that. And so we have a higher percentage of Hispanic and Black by triple, probably.
That may be accurate. I have to go back and check. I'm very familiar with the numbers that we serve.
Okay.
And so.
And so how are they identified? Sorry if that was.
For inclusion in the program?
Yes.
School districts do a variety of things. They are required to serve students in an inclusive environment. So we really highly discourage a categorical program. We encourage inclusion. So even though the majority of children may be children who are in special education or who are Hispanic, we really encourage programs to look at these identified risk factors. We know there are a lot of other risk factors, but besides the 3 that are identified here, but those are the ones we track. All school districts do have enrollment policies. There are some school districts, especially in the rural parts of the state, that, practically speaking, serve every 3 and 4-year-old child who in the community who wants to go. Places like Omaha and Lincoln, and I would say probably Columbus and some of the other areas, they have waiting lists that are very, very long. So they tend to serve a lot more children who have one or more of these risk factors. So there is not one set of criteria across the state. It really should be determined by what each different school district has in their community.
Thank you.
Senator Lanahan.
Thank you, Chairman Grony. Do you know what so down here with your 74%, so it's kind of what, 1, 2, 3, 4, fifth paragraph.
Yes.
74% of children had experienced one of the risk factors, which you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Do you know how many of them are special ed?
I should be able to tell you that.
Or close?
Yes.
You can get it
I
for
can
me.
get it to you.
Yeah,
Yes,
you can get it
because
for me.
we
So
do
here-
track that, yes.
Okay, because I've visited with a couple of school districts. Did the federal law change so, because when my kids were little 30 years ago, speech problems, they went to preschool, Sunset Hills, and almost every child in the room had some kind of disability, okay? From
Right.
severe to speech.
Yeah.
But my understanding is now, I don't know, I think it's federal, for every child with a disability, you have to have a child who doesn't have an IEP. Or that at least is a gold, or is it the law?
That's high. I will not speak to the federal law because I don't work in special education, but I do know that using the least restrictive environment, which would be with typically developing children, and for children birth to 3, it would be in their natural, wherever they normally would be if they didn't have a disability. So what we look at is, ideally, it would be essentially all children are served who have disabilities, but in the classroom, it would be approximately the percentage of kids who have a disability in that classroom. So it's not a special education classroom with a couple of peer models. It truly is an inclusive environment. So while sometimes people use that benchmark of 50%, that's not a hard and fast rule. Many times there are 3 or 4 children, many times there are 6 or 8. Occasionally, by the end of the year, in a number of places, if children are identified throughout the year with a disability, there may be more.
Okay. So, okay, I just wondered if it was, but that's, Well,
It-
if you
it
can find
does
out whether
follow-
that's federal or state
Yeah,
or...
it does follow the federal IDA requirements, but I will
Okay.
get you the exact definitions.
Okay, that'd be perfect. And then, let me see if I have one other question. On the back page, paragraph 4, is there a reason my teaching strategies gold, if it's a program set up to go to third grade, is there a reason we stop at K? Is it because the state tests take over there?
We don't, well, because we don't mandate any particular assessment
Okay.
until you get to the state assessments of third grade.
Okay, I got it. This number, and it strikes me as odd if you've got children birthed through age 2 at 93% meet, okay, so it's the next paragraph, I'm sorry. Children meet or exceed widely held expectations across all developmental areas during the spring observation period. So obviously, if a significant percentage of these children have learning disabilities or some kind of disability, they take that into adjustment, what they expect that child's goals to be, not that they...
It's actually widely held expectations for, widely held expectations does not necessarily equate to like the 75 percentile or something like that.
Right.
It's what, within the range of what we would expect children to be able to do.
And that particular child, okay,
Well, for all children.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, appreciate you being here.
Did you want to ask another question, Senator Walz?
I know Senator Merman did too.
Thank you, Senator Groening.
Sorry, you were
Is the availability of the program about the same all across the state, or does it vary by school district?
Availability to the community?
Yeah.
I would say that is not equal because there are proportionally more children, certainly in like the Lincoln-Omaha area, and in some of the larger communities. They tend to have longer waiting lists, so they don't have as many classrooms or home visiting programs as they would need. Whereas like a very small district in central or western Nebraska, they may have enough children to have one classroom, so one classroom will do it. And like I said, like Thayer Central serves pretty much every kid whose family wants them to go to preschool. I mean, they have several classrooms. That is not accurate in Lincoln or Omaha or Norfolk, places like that.
So is it available year-round?
Six Pants does, special education services are available to children year-round. Most of these programs are available 9 months of the year, like around the school year. There are very few that are really available a full 12 months.
And the limiting factor is usually the amount of space?
I would not say it's the amount of space, it's the cost. It's teachers are on teacher contracts during the summer. That would be an added expense, certainly. They would probably use the same classrooms they would use during the year, but it is much harder for the district to do that during the summer.
And then you had these percentages, so if a family is not on reduced lunch and don't meet any of these 3 criteria here, they're not eligible.
They can be, yes, they can be eligible. And like I said, in some of the it does depend upon availability.
Good.
Certainly, there are children in the 20-some school districts that don't have access to any program. But again, in very rural areas, many times, every child in the community. But again, places that are more highly populated, they do not have that capacity.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd say that the accessibility varies greatly across the state.
I'd like some clarification here.
Yes.
You said 15% of the students statewide in that age group are in a public school, pre-K. But before this program was even started, churches and private individuals had preschools, and they exist.
And they still do.
And I've heard from some small communities, we have a great one in our church, everybody gets along, our kids go there for $5 a day.
Yes.
And the other thing about the distortion of the actually, the percentages are distorted, because if you're a wealthy family or a middle-class family, you're going to pay for private preschool.
Yeah.
So the ones who are going are probably the poor, the ones that have English language in the bigger cities, because the parents who have the money are not going to stick them in a public school, they're going to stick them in the church. So these numbers can't do not reflect the general population of the state of Nebraska.
I would say,
demographics.
I would say, yeah, you're absolutely correct. I would also say that there are some of these children who are being served by school districts that may also be served in other programs.
And
So this is not a distinct number of children.
And the sixpence program, is it the interest off the original investment?
It's the interest off of the 40 million of the lands fund and 20 million off of the private endowment. There are also state general funds going into sixpence, and then there is also for a sixpence child care partnership. There is a funding source.
Put a
that's
dollar
federal.
amount on it.
Oh my! I cannot tell you off the top of my head. I will find that.
And didn't the original language of the bill say that it's only a grant for 2 or 3 years, hoping that the school will then take it up?
Sixpence is not. Now, the rest of these, like the preschool programs, if they get a grant, then if they're starting a program and never had a program before, then they'll get the grant for about 3 years. Then they'll be considered qualified. Their 4-year-olds will.
And that's the
be counted.
sixpence money?
That's the preschool money. The majority of programs, we have much more federal funding in the programs than we have state money, because we also use, partnerships with Head Start, with IDEA, and private pay and school district dollars. So after they've been a qualified program and they're rolling into state aid, or rolling into being their children counted for state aid in preschool, they may get a few dollars. They may get like $1,000 in state aid, in grant money the next year, or they may roll off of the grant. We call it rolling off of the grant completely.
And then we have the same problem we have with everything on funding for our schools, is if you're a non-equalized school district, you get no money for that child from the state.
Yeah.
The property taxpayer funds it.
Yeah,
All right, so, but I wanted to clarify
yes.
that 85% of the kids aren't in a preschool right now.
Not in a school-based program.
Yeah, not a public school-based program. A vast majority of them are in
Yes,
private,
absolutely.
and has been for 50 years.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Senator Linehan?
Thank you, Chairman Gurney. Are there any, because I grandkids in this age group now, and it seems to me, and this is, not a study, just what I've observed, that some schools charge.
Yes.
So some of these programs are, I'm sure if you got reduced charge, I'm not sure. Is there a statewide standard or any guidance on who should be charged, who shouldn't be charged, how much you can charge?
There are some children categorically who cannot be charged. If this is a program that is being offered to children who are eligible for Head Start, they cannot be charged, their families cannot be charged.
And what is the eligibility for Head
100%
Start?
of poverty.
100%.
Yes,
So
it's very
well
low.
below the free and reduced lunch?
Yes.
Okay.
And if this is what is written into the IEP for children with an IEP or FSP, then those services, they can't be charged. For other programs, they do need to have a sliding fee. If they're going to charge, they do need to have a sliding fee scale. When we do talk to different districts, and very truthfully, it's required in statute that if they're going to charge, they have to have a sliding fee scale. And so we really talk to them about, okay, what is it that will make sure that all your families who need it can have access to this? And so sometimes it falls along free and reduced lunch law, and we say they'll say if they're eligible for free lunch, there's no charge. If it's reduced lunch, it may be a very small amount. If they're full pay, then whatever it is. But that is not necessarily consistent across the state. It is an individual school district decision.
So it's not mandated by the state
No.
what they charge? Okay, that was what
it seemed to me, but I just
Yeah.
want to make that sure.
Yeah, just that if they do charge, they have to use the sliding fee scale.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. If we could get that information to committee on how much
Absolutely.
money is in this expense program that you disperse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that closes the testimony and hearing on early childhood grant program. We will now go to the interim hearing regarding the Education Improvement Fund that is in our Constitution. And Nicole Barrett, committee research assistant, has done wonderful work, a lot of hours researching this and starting to prepare the committee report to the legislature that has to be done by December 31st. We have to decide if we're going to recommend changes for the next 5 years by December 31st, or we push it off till next year with an emergency clause the following year. But it's time to start looking at the lottery funds again.
Yeah. Senator Groening, I just had a question because I think I was confused about what if somebody else wanted to speak to that specific issue?
Which issue?
The previous issue.
It was invited testimony.
You just did invited testimony?
Because it's not a hearing, it's basically a report presented to the committee that's in
Okay.
statute by the Education Department.
Okay.
So it wasn't actually a hearing, it was a report,
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes.
Just wondered.
Not Senator. Nicole, please begin.
Okay.
No, she's not running for legislature.
She is
It's not a Freudian slip.
At least, yeah.
That you know of.
She is not. Good morning, Senator Groening and members of the Education Committee. My name is Nicole Barrett, Nicolebarrett. I am the research analyst for this committee, and I'm here today to provide some introductory research that I've compiled on today's topic, and then turn the microphone over to our invited guests to share their expertise. The purpose of this hearing is to help the committee make recommendations regarding how the Education Improvement Fund should be allocated to best advance the educational priorities of the state for the 5-year period beginning with fiscal year 2021-22. Those recommendations are statutorily required to be submitted by December 31st of this year. Per the Nebraska Constitution, after payment of prizes and operating expenses, as well as a $500,000 transfer to the Compulsive Gamblers Fund, 44.5% of the Nebraska lottery proceeds shall be used for education as the legislature may direct. As a point of reference, in fiscal year 2018-19, education's allocation of lottery dollars was $20.5 million. The current allocations, which were primarily established by LB 519 in 2015 and sunset June 30th, 2021, are as follows. 1% to the Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant Fund, 17% for the Department of Education Innovative Grant Fund, which funds both competitive innovation grants and standard college admission testing, 9% to the Community College Gap Assistance Program Fund, 8% to the Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund, 62% to the Nebraska Opportunity Grant Fund, and 3% to fund distance education incentives. Today's invited testifiers will provide more explanation and analysis of each of these funds, and of course, I'm available to answer any questions you might have. But I do want to provide some insight into some additional findings that I've discovered while researching for this. So in addition to the allocation changes made in 2015, LB 519 implemented 2 new procedural mechanisms related to education lottery dollars. First, the statute requires that an amount equal to 10% of the revenue received in the prior fiscal year be retained in the Education Improvement Fund before distributions are made. This retainer was added to the statutory language for the first time in lottery history for cash flow purposes. However, analysis of the financials from the first 3 fiscal years, as well as conversations with NDE, CCPE, and the Legislative Fiscal Office, have not provided any indication that this retainer is currently serving its intended purpose or necessary in future years. There are several mechanisms in place at the agency level to protect against fluctuations in lottery proceeds, and there's actually no statutory language that allows the retainer to be utilized in the event of an economic downturn. Second, the statute requires the entire education lottery distribution to be transferred into the Education Improvement Fund and then transferred to individual allocations. This process was necessary to facilitate the calculation of the 10% retainer. NDE calculates the retainer with the September distribution, makes the appropriate adjustments to each fund, and then transfers quarterly distributions to all funds according to their statutory allocation, but the 3% allocated for distance education incentives remains in the Education Improvement Fund per statute. Another interesting finding was that there are currently no statutory requirements related to the reporting of financial data by the Education Improvement Fund nor by any of the allocation recipients. The process of compiling data for this committee at a level that provided both formatting consistency and a drilled down level of transparency as you prepare the report and recommendations became a laborious and time-consuming process for NDE, CCPE, the Legislative Fiscal Office, and myself. So perhaps adding reporting requirements to the statute in the new bill would provide greater transparency to the citizens of Nebraska, as well as for future legislatures as they contemplate the effectiveness of lottery dollar allocations in the future. Finally, it may interest the committee to know that 2 big lottery games have changed their rules and per ticket costs throughout this decade, which has resulted in revenue boost or spikes to the state in corresponding years. So that's Mega Millions and Powerball. Each of those games has also had a record $1.5 billion jackpot in the past 2 years. So this explains some of the fluctuations that our state has seen in lottery revenues in recent years. As always, if there are additional details that I can provide to any of you on the committee, please don't hesitate to ask. Are there any questions?
Senator Pansy Brooks.
May I please have a copy of your testimony?
Yes.
Because I'd like those statistics. You said them so quickly, I didn't
Oh, okay.
get them
Yes.
written down, so thank you.
Yes.
Like, if we could get it in the near future, so during all this testimony, if I
Yep.
could see that, that would be great. Thank you for
Yep.
that work. Good
Any other
history.
questions?
It's a good history. Thank you, Ms. Barrett.
So right now, we don't have a report where every dollar went from those who distributed. Which school district got how much money? Is that what you're saying? There's no reporting requirement on?
There's not a financial reporting requirement at that level. So it has been compiled in some of the draft information that was provided to the committee with the hard work of those people that have been helping me at both agencies and the Legislative Fiscal Office. So we have compiled that, and there are reporting requirements for the different funds to update the legislature on the funds, but there's not necessarily a requirement for the certain level of financial detail that needs to go into those. So it has been compiled and provided for this report, but I am suggesting
But you had
this-
to ask for it and search for it and ask them to help you, but then you ended up compiling it instead of is that true?
Yes, with a lot of assistance from those partners as well. In some cases, it was, for example, in the gap assistance, the coordinating commission has they provide a lot of financial information in there, but then we went and took it a step further to analyze at the community college level how much was spent and put it in a consistent format in that way. So in no way am I implying that there's not good record keeping or things like that happening. It's just a matter of some consistency across might be something the committee might want to look at.
Thank you. Senator Walsh.
I could probably ask you too, Senator Groney, but I'll just ask a question because I don't know. Once we hear all the testimony, what does the process look like then as far as how we make those decisions? What does that process look like?
All right, let me answer that.
Yep.
We have to have a report by December 31st.
Right.
Nicole has started on it, but it has to be approved by the committee. We have to, in that report, make recommendations to the future, what we think needs to be done with the lottery funds, if any changes. In statute, it dictates that every 5 years we do this report, which also, in the past, I was on the committee 5 years ago with Senator Sullivan, where we went through and we reapportioned it. We looked at all the programs. We said, is this one doing what it needs to do? Are we overfunding this one? Are we overfunding this one? And then we come together and say, let's make a recommendation to the body of how we should, with a statute, how we should distribute this lottery funds.
Okay, so we'll be meeting.
We're going to have some
later
exec
on
sessions
to
in
have-
December.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Commissioner Bloomstead.
Good morning, Senator Groney, members of the committee. I am Matt Bloomstedt. Bloomstedt spelled B-L-O-M-S-T-E-D-T. And I'm the Commissioner of Education for the state of Nebraska. And thanks for inviting me to provide a little additional information. By the way, I just want to compliment Ms. Barrett on all of her work. I will tell you I know it's a lot to do that work. I've been in that role before, and I complimented her privately, but I thought complimenting her publicly was well worth the effort too. So what I want to talk to you a little bit about, first of all, I know from Nicole's work you'll have access to a lot of historic pieces of the lottery. You'll have an opportunity, I think, to see the fiscal numbers that you were starting to talk about a little bit. I wanted to give you kind of perspectives, I think, really in the time since 2015, when LB 519 was passed, that kind of set up the current structure, and a couple changes that actually took place along the way as well that I think are important for your consideration on kind of next steps. Also, probably a couple lessons relative to distribution of grant funds in alignment with the way that the law was originally constructed and then how a change was done. And then kind of maybe last, a talk through of kind of other elements or overview of thoughts around maybe lessons. I guess that's maybe my best way to put it, some lessons around how we might use lottery and how we continue to use lottery going forward. So obviously back in 2015, I think I have that right, LB 519 was passed by this body that created the current distribution, as Nicole talked about, around lottery funds. There's and I think she ran these down already. One of those changes that I guess I would highlight is that it ended up being administered at the Department of Education in a different way. And the 10% piece, is it 10%, Nicole? The set-aside piece of the funding.
The retainers, 10%.
Yeah. We've had good conversations on that front and would concur with what Nicole had mentioned before. But us managing it was a change from what it used to be. It used to get directly appropriated to the various entities that it was split off to. But it does include some things that I think are specific to our work at the department, and I'll speak primarily to those. Number one, the expanded learning opportunity grant fund at 100% set aside. I don't know what that means.
I assume that's not, you're in charge here.
May I have your attention, please?
You have.
May I have your attention,
Yeah,
please?
you got it.
There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. There has been a fire alarm reported in the building. Please proceed to the stairways and exit the building. Do not use the elevators, but proceed to the stairways and exit the building.
Look what happened.
I know. I did ask someone to pull the fire alarm, but no kidding.
Sure, Matt.
May I have
I
your
don't know.
attention,
Are we supposed to be?
May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm reported.
Why does she not bring her phone?
There has been a fire alarm.
I'm taking it.
False.
Well, let's see.
I'm taking my purse and my phone.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not leaving it here. I was gonna take Luann's phone too.
I'm not sure.
This is typical, that we all just sit here and stuff. It can't mean us.
If they did, I could.
It's nothing to do with all of us getting
This is not the response
smoke
we want.
inhalation and. Did you ask something?
Yeah, false alarm.
Ask me after you come up.
For the record, I didn't ask anyone.
Fire alarm, a false alarm, all clear, all clear.
Okay.
right.
Okay.
I'll recompose
Didn't
here.
work very well, Matt.
I know.
All right.
So as I was starting to go down the path of LB 519 and the history of that, the kind of three major areas, or I guess maybe four areas for the department include the 1% for Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant Fund, 17% for the Department of Education Innovative Grant Funds, which I'll give you quite a bit more detail on that. 8%, which is the Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund, which is really a loan forgiveness program to bring people back. I'll keep talking. And 3% distance ed funds. Am I in candy camera
May I
today?
have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? There has been a fire alarm reported in the
Oh, it's the
building.
3%.
There has
For
been
the
a fire
distance
alarm
education
reported-
innovation incentives.
Oh.
Here.
No, that's okay. Yes, you do.
Correlation does not prove causation when he left the room. All right, I'll reticently continue. So those four basic areas. So I'll kind of go through each one of them briefly and then have a little bit more dialogue on them. So the 1% Expanded Learning Opportunity Grant Fund was something specifically designated in the statute that said that there be those funds set aside to support a set of schools in kind of startup costs, or a set of opportunities for startup costs for expanded learning opportunities, usually before or after school types of programming, right? That might be part of that process. So we run that as a separate, essentially a separate grant program underneath this activity. We also have the 17% of distant of the.
Have your attention, ladies, may I have your attention? The old fire alarm is a false alarm, all clear, all clear.
All right. He said that last time, too. So the 17% includes basically innovation grant opportunities for schools to apply for as well. But out of that 17%, there was in 2016, I think, a provision that was put in place to fund what we now have as the ACT as part of that. So a rough breakdown is roughly about 4.2 million goes to the grants and about 1.5 million goes to support the college entrance exam that we use for high school accountability. Yeah, that's out of that 17% portion of the funds. We also have 8% that is part of the Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund, and that's the loan forgiveness for teacher or for kind of hard to fill positions in education, and then 3% 1% that funds the distance education incentive. So I probably will spend the majority of time kind of talking through the grant funds, but I do want to highlight that the department has asked in the past to think about moving the ACT funding back to a general funded portion of that would free up these funds for the future. So something for your consideration as you continue to do this work and research around the future uses of lottery. The other component of this is we started in underneath LB 519, the original bill that created this distribution, with the grant funds were actually set up with the intention of having, I would say, innovative practices that could actually be put back into the school finance formula. And it actually, that had us set up the grant program in a very different way, with the intention of doing a lot of evaluation of it and proving those particular grants up as best practices relative to particular work. And so we had several things, and I know you'll get more detail, and we've shared more detail on the specifics of those initial grants, but they were set up with the intention of finding ideas that might fit into that school finance formula. That part was also a very cumbersome thing, and I think Nicole started to address that, a cumbersome element of the law. And really, we weren't in a position where we could say we know for certain those are the right things to be able to do, and it was a pretty short window of time to be able to implement something into the school finance formula. And given other considerations on school finance, it was a concern. And so that actually was changed, and that best practices allowance is the mechanism that was going to be used, was changed in LB 512 in 2017 and removed from that. At that point in time, the department also looked at the overall grant program and the expectations of what this grant program would do. Part of it was to find innovative ideas, certainly, right, that could be used and scaled across schools or across the state. The original construct, as I said, was really identifying particular practices, and I'll just use an example so you can get a sense of it. One of the original ones was really thinking about career education and how that was used, and I think it was in Scottsbluff area, around how that might be done. Well, in order for us to set up a heavy evaluation of what those costs were, how that would be implemented into a school finance formula, that takes a very different type of grant application than other things that maybe would come after that. What we looked at was really setting up, I think the intention was increasing the capacity of the state, and across the state education system, to ensure that we could have programs such as that be scaled in other places, and networks of those opportunities to exist across the state. So, for instance, something like that might have been career education related, we might now be in a position where we'd say, hey, look, if you're doing a grant and receiving grant dollars, how can this be shared with a broader set of schools so it can be shared as best practices across that fashion instead of through the school finance formula? So I hope that makes at least a little bit of sense of that type of transition. The other component, I think, that we've really started to look around and build kind of a set of priorities around those particular networks. I know there's always an interest to kind of create perhaps funds for a given moment in time, such as expanded learning opportunities, right? I mean, that's an area where there's been considerable interest. In fact, we actually had one of the innovative grants that went towards that, in addition to the 1%. The explanation that I could give on that sense is we wanted to create some unifying approaches between those two types of grants that were available. So the 1% expanded learning opportunity grant is really directed for new programs. The additional funds that might go through the innovation side of the grant would be essentially to enhance and share those best practices across the state. So we've experienced those types of changes, and actually in 4 years' time, it's had to change kind of twice already in that setting. But currently, we have other topics that we've found to be areas to invest in and have had several school districts and others be involved in. One is around actually data visualization and use. And so I can use, for example, how we might use assessment data in a school district. I take reading even as an example of ensuring that that data is immediately available to schools and to teachers and even to parents to try to visualize the use of that data in a way that's going to help improve education. So that's one current topic. We've talked about instructional materials and creating a network around instructional materials as another topic, really working with the best materials across the schools that are using the best materials across the state, and actually doing a deeper dive into if you use the proper instructional materials, it'll have a substantial impact on your student outcomes, right? So we know that to be a good use, and again, that network has just started as well. There's one on really thinking about the capacity of teachers around professional development for asynchronous, or an opportunity for asynchronous professional development, not to have to pull as many teachers out of their classrooms and to be able to use that from an online setting to expand that. So we're using this opportunity to really expand the thoughtfulness around professional development in that particular case, and working with a whole set of schools on that one as well. And then, as I had mentioned before, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Design Challenge, and this was an interesting one, asking folks to help redesign expanded learning opportunities. Even though we'd built capacity in certain places through the other grant, this is really a way to further extend how those could be shared across the state more effectively, and think about what things like, and we've seen trailers and other things that develop that makes those mobile and therefore more broadly available. And then really thinking about supports in various kind of technology services across the state, as far as whether it's data use or programs, online programs, or any type of curricular materials that might be available statewide. So those are some areas that we're currently working on, and continue to have topics and issues that I think would fit into this type of network approach. We've talked about everything from how to do training around student discipline statewide, to thinking about professional development for improving in schools that maybe are otherwise struggling. And again, I could probably point to using the reading side of that equation as a part of that. Also thinking about supports for leaders that are in our needs improvement schools, and creating networks around those things to create a set of best practices that can be shared has really been our push. We've even had topics or conversations at least around cybersecurity and other things that schools are asking us to help provide leadership on, and these networks actually end up being a place where that could potentially be done. So we have probably a lot of information that I know our team shared with Nicole as you go into this, and I can certainly take kind of some of those questions, but I do think moving from a mentality around kind of what I used to call salting the earth with money, and I see this happening sometimes on federal funds as well. Everybody gets some distribution of money, and you hope good things happen, and then somebody has to evaluate what the good things are. The design, as we've kind of redesigned it since the law changed in 2017, is to think of ways, what are key structures or key systems or key capacities that should be built across the state, and how do we work with a set of schools that might volunteer to participate because of the grant through those particular processes to improve the capacities for instructional leadership or addressing the challenges that might exist for poverty or otherwise for students that might come to school with certain disadvantages. So it's really a mindset shift for us, and I'm starting to see that our ability to leverage those funds with other funds is also very critical. Schools tell me that often, like distance education funds right now. I think it's important that we've had distance education incentive to be able to grow that network. Now I think the next opportunity is how could we use that to be more effective in the exchange of distance education courses, the kind of modernization of it, the best practices in a school setting, the supports for teachers in those environments to ensure that that's being done well as well. So there's probably a lot of information that I know you're going to continue to gather throughout the course of the day, but I would certainly take questions from you on any of these topics, and probably things I missed, so, and I'm just so pleased that the fire alarm hasn't gone off again. I might recommend a network on safety.
Any questions? So you mentioned how much money was spent on the test, the ACT test?
Yeah, the ACT was about $1.5 million, roughly that, so.
So you're looking at putting it, because it's continuous, it's in statutes, it's part of,
Yeah.
it's part of, it's not innovative anymore. You're looking at putting that cost into your budget to the appropriations.
Yeah, and actually, I think we have a couple times, and I appreciate that at least we've had a funding source for the ACT. And I think when it originally passed, it was like, go to, use lottery if you have to, and then certainly the budget process worked that way. So we have continued to put that into our budget request,
But you've
and
used
will again.
lottery money because it was in the statute to
Yeah,
pay for that.
yeah,
You're trying
it was.
to put it into your budget, so that'd free that up from other uses.
Right, yes.
For on the innovative grant fund, it seems to me like there's, besides the testing, there was 1, 2, 3, 4 schools and 1 educational, and the coordinating council. Split that money up out of 244 school districts. But it seems like it's bigger schools that have grant writers. And how does that relate to a little school, Wallace, Nebraska, in my district, that's lottery funds? I mean, it's not you, I'm just saying it's in statute. So how were they selected, and how many applicants did you have?
Yeah, so there was an application process, and I think we funded, in the first round, I'll have to double check, but I mean, about 2/3, even 3/4 of the requests that were made. So originally, we had a broad dispersion of those funds. And again, and I think you're right, you only get certain places that request funds, so it kind of, and you see funds sometimes in a request that would be maybe, a few $1,000s to, bigger requests that may have been in tens of thousands of dollars for an activity. When you start to figure out the cost of kind of evaluating each one of those smaller pots of money, you start to question, is that going to have the type of impact? And so as we shifted to think a little bit about these networks, we actually can engage more schools in that they would participate in a set of networks around these funds, which actually spreads the advantage of the grant out to a broader set of schools. So a smaller school district might really benefit from the instructional material side or something like that.
Wouldn't the problem with that be because the innovation now becomes from an ideal presented by somebody in your department instead of come from the grassroots up?
Except we kind of do it in the reverse. I mean, and the approach has been really taking folks' applications and kind of putting those together into a pool of ideas has really been the approach.
The next 2 years, you're going to take that approach.
Yeah.
And so we'll have, at least this next year, see what you've done.
Yeah, I think it'll change because the original construct of it was see what happens out there. And you can imagine a $10,000 or $15,000 impact, and we had to analyze whether or not that would be a good thing to put in the school finance formula. Didn't seem to make a lot of sense in the end. But in this type of approach, I think we could say these are really, truly our best practices that we can scale up and use and work with between ESUs and school districts to say this is areas of work that we all need and actually build that capacity.
There's innovation out there already, but that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Lexington is great with their student population and their reading programs and their results. There's innovation there.
Yeah.
What are we doing here to make sure those innovations are known by the other 243 school districts?
Yeah, and in fact, it's a great example of that. I think if you take what's happening across Lexington relative to their strategies to deal and address the educational needs of their English learner population, if we actually use this to have a network of best practices for schools that are serving similar students. In fact, we kind of do this with as we identify schools that are in needs improvement, for instance, and are struggling, we look at those that are kind of breaking the trend, right? Or those that are actually outperforming the expectations. And how do we pair those schools up or those practices up, and actually creating a network around that helps them share that information is part of the strategy.
Or
there.
Grand Island has, I understand, a great career path They're actually hands-on working with businesses. I would think that would be innovation that we'd be looking at to share.
Yeah, and
with the other school
absolutely. And I think it's a great point, because actually what we found is that actually being able to use this concept instead of invent the latest, greatest thing, who's doing something innovative, and how can we build capacity around that for the
Don't force
future?
innovation on somebody.
Yeah.
Somebody came up with it.
Yeah.
Somebody invented a car,
Yeah,
not the government.
yeah.
Anyway, all right, thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Yeah,
We'll be
yeah,
working
thanks.
with
And we'll
you on
continue
this.
to, whatever you need, we'll be there to try to address those questions too. So thanks a lot.
Now we have Dr. Matthew Bloomstead, Commissioner of Education, Nebraska Department, no, excuse me.
That was him.
I just read the second line. I hire people who take care of me. Dr. Michael Baumgartner, Executive Director of the Coordinating Commission of Post-Secondary Education. They oversee the Nebraska Opportunities Grant and the Community College Gap Assistance Programs within the lottery.
Good morning, Chairman Groening, members of the Education Committee. My name is Mike Baumgartner, M-I-K-E-B-A-U-M-G-A-R-T-N-E-R. I'm the Executive Director of the Coordinating Commission for Post-Secondary Education, and I'm here today to testify, provide information in strong support of maintaining the current distribution of lottery funds to the Nebraska Opportunity Grant, which receives 62% of the Education Improvement Fund allocation, and the Community College Gap Assistance Program Fund, which receives 9%. I also want to thank Ms. Barrett for her work, for contacting us, reaching out, and meeting with us. I hope we've answered all of her questions. If not, we were certainly look forward to answering more as we go forward. Let me give a little context before I get into the details of the report. And I have handed out today, it will be handed out today, the NOG reports and the GAP reports that we do annually. And a lot of the figures that I am going to give you are in that report. So you won't need to follow along, but you'll have it in hand at some point, because presentation doesn't go exactly along with the reports, but the information's in there. Propelled by the need for education and training beyond high school to participate in today's economy and the greater share of college costs borne by students and parents, college affordability is one of the most pressing issues of our time. This is seen in the myriad proposals that we get from elected officials and candidates at the federal level for student loan debt relief, expansion of Pell and other programs, free college of public institutions, and the burgeoning number of innovative programs at state level, such as college promise programs, returning adult grants, workforce ready grants, tuition-free dual credit, and at the institutional level, things like emergency grant aid and food pantries. Historically, Nebraska has supported higher education better than many states, and for a state with a population of 1.9 million, I think Nebraska punches above its weight. Between its three public sectors and independent institutions, covers a wide range of programs and levels ranging from adult ed and non-credit training, that's in the GAP program, to state-of-the-art graduate and professional education and research and public service across the vast geographic range. Stable state support has translated into moderate tuition and fees at Nebraska institutions, but even moderate tuition and fees have grown compared to family incomes, and tuition and fees are only part of the college costs that students face. In many cases, tuition and fees are less than half the cost. We have books and supplies, room and board, transportation, miscellaneous health care items, child care, foregone income from going to school. One area where Nebraska does not lead the pack is in its state financial aid programs. This is evident in several places. For example, in the National Association of State Student Grant and Aid Programs 2017-18 report on state-sponsored student financial aid, which was released this week, Nebraska maintained its rank of 35th in the country in need-based aid, measured on a per undergraduate basis. Ms. Barrett had the previous report. We are almost exactly the same rank, and just a couple dollars off. So that's both good and bad. And we're consistent, but we're consistently low. Our aid measured on an undergraduate FTE basis is $210 per FTE. To get to the national average of $667 per FTE, we would need to triple the NOG program's funding to $60 million a year. even if we were to give just a $1,000 grant to every one of the 36,000 eligible Nebraska students, it would require us to nearly double funding for the NOG program to $36 million. This relative underfunding shows up clearly at the institutional level as well. It shows up in the Commission's biennial tuition fees and affordability report, where almost across the board, fewer first-time, full-time undergraduates at Nebraska public institutions receive state grants than at peer institutions, and the amounts they receive are considerably less than the peers. For example, at UNL in 2016-17, and this is using national IPEDS data so that we can do cross-state and cross-institutional comparisons, 12% of first-time, full-time undergraduates receive state grants compared to 25% of their peer institutions. The average award was half the peers, 2,233 compared to 4,475. At Chadron State, it was 12% versus 32% of students receiving the grants. At Metro, it was 9% versus 20%. The dollar amounts were $649 versus $1,595. As in other states, low-income Nebraskans are less likely to continue to college within a year after high school graduation. If all Nebraska high school graduates continued to college at the same rate that white, non-Hispanic, non-low-income students did in 2017, over 2,000 additional Nebraskans would enroll in college by the spring following high school graduation each year. It would be 2,000 more students. Greater affordability will get more students into college, and it will also keep more graduates in the state, particularly in rural areas. A study published by the Federal Reserve this past January found that individuals with student loan debt are less likely to remain in rural areas than those without it, that individuals in the highest quartile of outstanding student loan debt balances are most likely to leave rural areas. And that's not to mention the observed effects in the economy of student debt on home ownership, business creation, and family formation. As I mentioned, I've given you for this hearing the most recent NOG report. This is for 2017-18 because we audit institutions after the close of the fiscal year. Our 2018-19 report won't be ready until January. Right now, one of my colleagues, Richie Morrow, he is here today, but he's been going out to all the campuses in the state to do the audit of the NOG program, the ACE scholarship, and the GAP program as well. So that takes several months to compile. I think you were all familiar with the Nebraska Opportunity Grant, but if not, in a nutshell, it provides need-based financial aid to Nebraska undergraduates attending college at Nebraska colleges and universities in pursuit of an undergraduate credential. Although comparatively small, the Nebraska Opportunity Grant is a successful program that serves students across all sectors. It's flexible, its funding is stable and rising thanks to lottery funds, and grant recipients graduate and contribute to Nebraska's economy. First, the flexibility. The program can be used by full-time or part-time students. It can be used by students fresh out of high school or students returning to college as adults. It can be used for tuition and fees, or it can be used for other education expenses. This flexibility in the program sets it apart from programs in many other states, which typically are just for tuition and fees and usually go to students coming straight out of high school. NOG was designed to be slightly more inclusive of middle-income students than the federal Pell Grant program, giving students eligibility up to 110% of the maximum expected family contribution for Pell eligibility. So for the current year, the maximum expected contribution for Pell eligibility is $5,576. That means that if the federal government calculates that you can contribute more than that, you're not going to get a Pell Grant. For the NOG program, we go up to $6,133 this year. In 2017-18, 36,028 Nebraska undergraduates who filed a FAFSA met the eligibility requirements. NOG is distributed to eligible institutions according to a statutory formula that is based on their share of eligible FTE and their tuition and fees, capped at UNL tuition and fees. In recent years, as enrollment has grown in the University of Nebraska system relative to the other sectors, especially the for-profit sector, which has declined precipitously in Nebraska, the university has received a growing share of the total. The Nebraska Opportunity Grant is decentralized, meaning that participating higher ed institutions determine who receives a NOG grant and the amount each recipient receives, capped at a maximum of 1/2 tuition and fees at UNL the previous year. That allows institutions to package NOG dollars to meet the most pressing needs among their students. In 2017-18, 12,849 students received awards, averaging $1,354. That distribution can be found on page 13 of that NOG report. Thanks to lottery funds, the NOG program has been stable and predictable for post-secondary institutions, even during recent tight budgets. This stability is important to institutions that are packaging financial aid awards before appropriation levels are even set, and provides some security from potential mid-biennium reductions. While the general fund appropriation for NOG has basically stalled for a decade, it is currently less than it was in FY08 by $100,000. Right now, we're at $6.6 million, and we were at $6.7 in 2008. Lottery funds have allowed measured but steady program growth as lottery transfers increase. Lottery appropriations will have increased by $3.3 million between FY17 and FY21, from $10.1 to $13.4 million. And with continuing growth in transfers and responsible spending of the balance of the Nebraska Opportunity Grant Fund, lottery funds can provide stable support at about $15.3 million beginning in FY22 and continue at that rate for at least a decade, assuming that the lottery funds transfers grow as well. However, the program will need additional general funds in the future to make gains in affordability that Nebraska needs. Matching NOG recipients with enrollment and degree data from the National Student Clearinghouse from 2010-11 through 2018-19, 73,445 unique students have received at least one NOG award. And of those, 37,489 have received at least one certificate, diploma, or degree. And keep in mind when you hear those figures that many of those 73,445 are still enrolled, because we're picking up freshmen through seniors in that figure. These students are getting degrees in majors that matter to the Nebraska economy. 3,144 education majors, 6,977 health majors, 5,182 trades majors, 5,528 STEM majors, 7,739 business and communications majors, and over 11,000 liberal arts and social and behavioral science majors. Because NOG is decentralized rather than formula-driven, tracking graduation rates in a meaningful way is difficult because the student may not get the award for 4 years. They may not get it as a freshman. If they got it as a freshman, they may not get it as a sophomore, etc. However, we are pleased to report that first-time students who receive the NOG award at the beginning of their freshman year graduate at rates consistent with Pell Grant recipients, as one would expect. That's about 55% for bachelor's degrees within 6 years and 35% for a credentialed community college within 3 years. Turning to the GAP Assistance Program. GAP Assistance Program is relatively new, having been passed in 2015 and implemented for FY17, so we are in the 4th year of operation. I've also provided each of you with a copy of the 2018-19 GAP report. It's intended to address a couple of gaps. First, it's targeted to 12 occupational fields that have been identified as in demand. Those include healthcare, transportation, logistics, construction, metals, manufacturing, IT, and others. As you know, we have a gap between the supply of skilled workers and the demand for skilled workers in those fields. Second, it can only be used for programs that are not covered by other financial aid, specifically Pell Grants and NOG. This means that a program must be non-credit, or with the passage of LB 180 earlier this year, programs that are for credit but too short-term to be funded by Pell. So you cannot get a GAP award and a Pell award or a NOG award in the same year because the GAP programs are not eligible for Pell, and hence they're not eligible for NOG. And prior to the GAP program, we had a gap between existing financial aid programs and the needs of low and moderate income students. The program is governed by the Nebraska Community College Student Performance and Occupational Education Grant Committee. That committee is made up of a member of the Coordinating Commission, the Department of Ed, the Department of Labor, the Department of Economic Development, and 3 community college representatives. The program is administered by the Coordinating Commission. And at the state level, that administration means calculating distributions based on reimbursable education units, approving programs for eligibility, collecting and reporting data on program participation and expenditures, and auditing the colleges. The programs are actually administered on each campus. Colleges determine student eligibility, track student outcomes, deliver the education, and market the GAP program. Distributions to colleges include funds for administration, ranging from 10% at the largest colleges to 20% for the smallest colleges. Eligible students must be Nebraska residents with income at or below 250% of poverty. That's $31,000 for a single person and about $64,000 for a household of 4 at the current year. Gap aid applicants must demonstrate to the college's satisfaction that they're able to complete a program, that they can be accepted into and complete a 4-credit program, because every GAP program has to demonstrate that it can move into, as a stackable credential, a 4-credit program, and that they have the ability to obtain and maintain full-time employment. GAP funds can be used for tuition, direct training costs, required books and equipment, and necessary fees. These costs vary widely across programs. For example, a CNA or medication aid course will not cost as much as a CDL certification, welding training, or a high-end IT program that's offered not for credit. As of today, there are 338 approved programs in the 12 in-demand occupational areas. That total grew 10% as a result of the passage of LB 180 this spring. So that's what brought in those 4-credit programs that were too short for Pell, but were still for credit, so that they weren't eligible for Pell. So they weren't eligible for the original GAP program. Health services and precision metals manufacturing were the most utilized programs in FY19, followed by transportation, warehousing, and distribution logistics. Of the 252 approved program participants in FY19, 60% were male, 40% were female. Top fields for male participants were transportation and precision metals. The top for females was health services. The GAP program receives about $1.8 million each year from the Education Improvement Fund. By statute, no more than $1.5 million can be awarded from the fund during any fiscal year. Once allocated to the colleges, unspent monies stay with the colleges, so they carry a balance at the college as well as we do at the state level. The governance committee will be able to redistribute funds among colleges to match demand as the program matures. So if you find that one college has needs beyond what they are getting based on the formula that distributes by REUs, the committee will be able to move money around to those colleges from those that aren't using as much. The number of applicants for GAP funding has steadily increased since the first year, as have expenditures. Participation varies across colleges. Some of this is attributable to the concentration of industries and population in community college areas. Some is due to the number of programs that are for credit as opposed to not for credit. I believe the implementation of LB 180 will increase participation across the board. I'm also aware that Senator Bowles, who sponsored LB 519 and LB 180, is planning to introduce legislation to extend the program to Nebraska Indian Community College and Little Priest Tribal College in January, which should also increase utilization. Right now, those colleges, as they are not defined as community colleges, do not participate, but they do offer in-demand workforce programs that where students could benefit. While the GAP program has yet to reach its full potential, it is a vital addition to the state's post-secondary affordability arsenal. Nebraska was a fairly early adopter of GAP-type funding, and it's caught on in other states as they work to match worker skills with available jobs. The importance of this type of funding is now recognized at the national level as well, with various bills to reauthorize the Higher Education Act, including provisions to extend Pell to short-term training. However, given divergent reauthorization bills in the House and the Senate, that possibility seems remote for now. I don't know if it'll ever happen. There's support in both chambers, but I don't know if the bill will happen. So the GAP program will remain relevant and necessary for the foreseeable future, filling a gap that we have in our financial aid programs. And I would be happy to...
Any questions? Senator Walls.
Thank you, Chairman Groening. I just have a quick question, Paige. Do you have this? It's okay.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so it says total allocation under the community colleges, and then it says remaining balance, and you may have said what that means, but what is the remaining balance?
The remaining balance is the amount that has not been spent by the colleges yet.
By the colleges, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Senator Panzen Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman Groening. Thank you for these excellent summaries. These are really wonderful and will be helpful. So I guess I skimmed through because I'm trying to find the place where you're talking about how the money's going. Like you said, a bunch of it goes to teaching, a bunch of it goes to healthcare, a bunch of it goes to the trades. Where is that?
That is not in this report yet. That is,
Okay.
we just have, that is going to show up on the one-page thing that we do.
Okay,
But it's,
so
wasn't.
makes
for that
sense that
report.
I didn't find it,
Yes.
but you will get it to
I
us.
will send that out. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, we will send that out to you all.
Senator Shanahan?
Thank you, Chairman Groney. So on the pie chart, the NOG pie chart, recipients by sector, I just want to make sure I understand. So independent would be Hastings College, Wesleyan,
Yes.
okay. Then University of Nebraska is all 3 campuses. That's the whole system.
Well, actually, all 5 campuses, because the Med
5,
Center.
I'm sorry,
and
UMC.
CTA.
Yeah, okay. State colleges are the 3.
Yes,
Community colleges are the 6.
yes.
Private career, is that like, what is that?
If you look right above that on page 2, you can see that's Capital School of Hairstyling, College of Hair Design, Creative Center.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, you have it all here.
Yeah. It's, that list was considerably longer. We have lost Vatterott College, Wright Career College, which is the other, ITT.
That's
and another
okay.
one.
I just wanted, and then I just want to clarify, maybe I'm just asking you to repeat it. So I think what you said at the beginning of your statement is we punch, Nebraska taxpayers punch way above their weight when it comes to what we fund for the institutions, but we're dropping the ball when it comes to.
Well, I would say that Nebraska, not just on funding, but just the way that the system is constructed, the quality of the system, I think in terms of other states of similar size, West Virginia, Maine, Idaho, and then you think University of Nebraska system, community college, state college, we do a tremendous job. We've got a great system here. But we don't fund our financial aid programs at the level that other states do, and that shows up in some of our affordability figures.
And it also shows up in losing kids who get free rides elsewhere outside the state, right? At least that's what we've been.
Well, there are some of those.
Yeah.
There are many low-income students who are not going to college
Because
at
they
all
can't- 'cause they can't
because
get
they can't
money.
afford it. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you. This is all very, very helpful.
Any questions? To follow up on Senator Linehan, we are very affordable tuition-wise, right? I think Nebraska's last in the lowest tuition in the Big Ten.
Yes, but yes.
All right, and that's the same with our state colleges.
Relative, yes, relative. I mean, you got to keep in mind what parents and students can afford, as well as how we compare to other institutions.
But our
Our
standard-
tuition and fees are better
Our
than.
cost of living
yes.
and in state income levels in the state are pretty
Yeah.
comparable.
Yeah.
But then when you compared how much we assist low income, did you compare that to a dollar amount or a percentage of the tuition?
There are 2 measures that I use. The one on institutions is looks at the first-time, full-time undergraduates who receive aid by any different type. It breaks it out by federal Pell, by state and local grants, who received loans, who received it from private sources. And that looks at both the percentage of students and the amount of money they get. We have fewer students proportionately than our peer institutions who are getting state grants, and they are getting lower amounts of dollars. When I'm comparing at the national level, I'm looking at the amount of money that is appropriated for need-based grant programs divided by undergraduate FTEs. So if you're in Illinois and you have $400 million in a grant program, in a need-based grant program, and you have, I don't know, they might have 400,000, 350,000 undergraduate FTEs, so it would be making that comparison on the amount of need-based grant aid that's available
So-
on a per-student basis.
Illinois is a good example. I at least ran into 4, when I go out and about restaurants and coffee shops, I ask, because I'm ed chair, I ask if they're going to the University of Nebraska. I ran into 4 kids who came here from Illinois because of the disaster of their state funding and the cost of their education. So that's not a real good comparison. But my point is, Michigan's $50,000 to go to University of Michigan. If they give $3,000 or $4,000 in low-income assistance, you can't compare 4,000 to our 1,600.
That's,
Because you've got to compare the percentage of the tuition that we aid them with, not dollar for dollar.
well, that's why I include both the national measure and at the campus level, because at the campus level, when you look at the peer institutions, you will see that our students get fewer state grants and at a lower amount than in other places.
But if they're paying a lot more tuition in Michigan, they need a bigger help, more help.
Yeah, we also in that report look at net cost of attendance, and I didn't bring that report. I'd be happy to go over it with you. We are a relatively affordable place. Part of what brings down our net cost of attendance is the institutions here will put more into financial aid than they will at a state that has more in state aid. So
We're
the state
also
put in
third or
state
fourth in the nation per capita support of our higher education
aid. We are strong supporters of higher education.
with our tax dollar.
Yeah.
The other one is on the gap assistance. Nicole did wonderful work here. Of the 3 years in existence, 3,700,000 of it sitting in your balance, ending balance, or the college, individual college's ending balance. That's 68% of the total amount collected over those 3 years.
Yeah.
Were we too ambitious? I'm not saying the program, but I supported it fully when I was a member of the Education Committee under Sullivan. But have we been too aggressive by throwing more money at it than we need to? We should have stepped this in a little bit, because you've got enough sitting there now to fund it at the rate you were funded in the past for the next 2 years minimum without throwing one more dollar at it.
I think that it will continue to grow, but I think that adjusting that percentage may be necessary. It's hard with the expansion of the program. You know, I think that it'll grow. It's growing every year. There is a lot of money sitting there, and that might be some place where you.
Good program, too aggressive
Yeah.
the funding. Thank you. Senator Lenahan.
I'm going to ask you a question. It's not right. I don't expect you to have an answer, but hopefully you could get back to us. So we've all been exposed to, hopefully over the summer, the workforce is that we don't have enough people, right? How can we get more people to come to Nebraska? Do you have numbers for? I know somebody from Shadron once told me that they get a lot of kids from Wyoming and South Dakota, and they stay in Nebraska. Do you, at the coordinating commission, keep track of how many students come from outside of Nebraska, go to college here and stay here?
We don't have information on how many stay here. We
Okay.
have it on the number, the way that the federal government collects that. We are able to do first-year students to see what state they came from to each institution. So among those first-year students, we can look at net migration to state and institution. We don't have the information to see if they stayed here. That would have to be through the longitudinal data system to match whether they were working here or whether they were in college here after they graduated. So I don't have that.
I'd be interested in just seeing that, and I know it's not part of this today, but interested in just seeing the freshman data, like which schools are pulling kids from other states. Because we know generally if you go to college in a state, chances are you might stay in that state.
I have one copy of
You are very prepared.
that. Well,
So we have copy machines here.
I carry one-pagers on the most important things with me wherever I go.
Okay, I will share this.
And
If anybody wants to.
yeah, we can break that down further by institution. You just have the top 10 institutions, but that shows the states where people come from and where they go.
Okay, we can get copies, right? Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Pansy Brooks.
I would like to then follow up and try to see, I mean, I don't believe that necessarily if they come from out of state that they are going to stay here. So I'm not sure that is actually a true statement in every case. So I don't know. I mean, that worries me to make the presumption that these people are going to stay here. Well, that's just my
I know, but that's not a
understanding.
question or whatever.
Yeah, well, my question is though, is there any way to follow up? I thought the university was following along who is staying and who is not.
Not a high percentage.
Pardon me?
I can't speak for the university. I know that each institution has been working on doing that. I don't know exactly where they're in the process. I mean, I believe they did a report to the regents earlier this year, but
And I believe there's a difference in privates versus public and what happens in all of that as well. Certainly nationally, that's true.
there are ways to follow those students. Finding that out about private institutions, the state would have to ask each one of the private institutions because they wouldn't have that information for the private student enrollments.
Wesleyan and,
Yeah, you would have to ask Wesleyan for that sort of information, because if they're not participating in the state's longitudinal data system that's being built, you're not going to have the enrollment for those students, so you're not going to be able to follow them anywhere either. But eventually, it will be there for all the public institutions.
okay, thank you.
Senator Lenahan?
I guess this is a statement too, so I'm gonna, but all those schools, I have 4 grown children that went to 4 different colleges, and they've moved all over the country, and those schools find them because they want their
Yeah.
alumni, so those schools could provide where they want to.
Yes, they could.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Senator
One
Halls?
question. Thank you, Senator Groney. I understand what Senator Groney was saying about being maybe a little bit too aggressive with the funding, that we have money left over. So my question is, would it be beneficial for us to look at expanding the eligibility requirements, especially considering the workforce issue that we have? Would that be something that we could look at?
Yeah, there are other states, Iowa, for instance, and Missouri, Indiana, who have new workforce grant programs for adults, most specifically, who may have used up Pell Grant eligibility, or who are just looking for a specific workforce certification that is for credit. I have examples. Maybe not here with me on that either,
Okay.
but yeah, Iowa has 2 new programs from their Future Ready Iowa program. They just did 2 that are kind of extensions of this, that are looking at students who are going directly into workforce-based programs. You don't want to duplicate what the Pell Grant program will pay for, probably, if you're constrained on resources and the student's eligible for Pell. You got to try to put your programs together so you're maximizing what the students can have and minimizing duplication of state resources and federal resources. But yeah, there are things to do there.
But to clarify, NOG is for a 4-year institution or a certified degree at a community college that you qualify for Pell Grants, and it's already 62% of the funds. The gap
Right.
was to pick up those high-demand trades. The workforce is demanding the welder, the
Yes. Yeah.
nurse's assistant, the truck driver.
Okay.
Yes.
And,
That's correct.
and we might have been a little aggressive on that funds, but that doesn't mean we take the money and give it to NOG. We need that back here for when those new innovative things do happen. But NOG, do they proportion that, or what do you, let's say UNL has, I guess we could wait till she comes up here, but 5,000 students that are requested, do they prorate that per child, or do they just pick the first 2,000 that show up?
They try to package the aid most effectively for the student. So if a student comes in and has a Pell Grant, maybe has something from a local foundation, maybe has some institutional money because they have a skill or academic achievement, they try to spread that out to help the most students. That's one of the
You make a
best
good
things
point.
about the flexibility.
There's millions of dollars, billions of dollars out there, somebody who was successful and gave money to a school for nursing or education, and they try to place those students to get that money, and then the last resort is the NOG.
Yeah, they will try to maximize the affordability for.
So when we
the
hear
greatest number of
statistics that 20,000 kids applied and only 5,000 got it, that's not necessarily that child didn't get something else
That's right.
and had basically everything paid for.
Well, they probably didn't have everything paid for, but if they were NOG eligible, they would have usually gotten a Pell Grant unless they were in that 10% where we go
But
above
if a
the
good college admissions offices would try to pinpoint those kids to a private grant for somebody who donated money to that college to give scholarships for nursing or education or
Right.
engineering.
Yeah, they will always do their best to make
We
sure
always
that.
seem to forget free enterprise and those individuals who do help education also. Thank you. Senator Pansy Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman Grody. So again, you said we don't leave the pack on the education grants, and we're basically 35th in need-based aid. And so I'm just trying to figure out who that includes. What, does that include, I mean, you're talking about NOG partly, right?
Yes, that is.
Senator Groney is saying, no, we're already doing too much on NOG, we're not doing enough in some of the trade areas. So I thought some of the trade areas were included in.
They can be, if they're for a degree. NOG is only for...
Or a community college, right?
Yes, yeah, a certificate or a degree or a diploma. It has to be, NOG has to be certificate degree.
So what is left? Just taking a few courses?
There are programs that are short-term because, and if you look at the back of the GAP report, you will see all the programs. There are a lot of programs that are done by the community colleges that are part of training programs that have a cost to the student but don't lead to a degree. So if you need 100 hours of basic welding to get a job, to get your welding certificate, or if you need a CNA to get a job.
But those are certificated.
Yes, but those are not Pell eligible because they are too short term. So GAP is oriented toward programs that are too short term to be Pell or are not for credit.
So if you're saying that we don't lead and we're 35th, if we expand to include those groups, would we rise in our ranking?
No, because you're talking about $1.5 million more on top of the amount of money. So that ranking is looking at the amount of dollars we have for need-based assistance. Right now, the NOG program this year is about $19 million, and if you throw on the GAP program, that would get us up to $20 million. That will make almost no difference in the amount per FTE compared to a state that's doing $300 million or $200 million or even $50 million. When I say that we would need to triple the amount of the NOG program to $60 million to get to the national average, GAP is a good program. I think it should continue. It doesn't move any needle on what our ranking is in terms of other states. It's just way too small. But it does meet a need. It meets a clear need that we have in the state for.
So are the other states funding it through general dollars, or do you see any kind of consistency across the states that are different than what we're doing?
Lottery dollars and general fund dollars are
the main.
About it. Yeah, that is pretty common. I mean, there might be some with a permanent fund, but not Texas or Alaska maybe, but general fund and lottery are the two big sources.
So I'm sorry if I'm still confused, but so is the amount tied just to Pell? Is that what NOG is tied to Pell? The amount, or not the amount, the people that are the eligibility is just tied to Pell?
It's basically the same, yeah, the same qualifications. A Pell grant is for
is only for certificated and or 4-year.
It is for degree and certificate program, 4-credit programs. So it has to be at least a year long.
So we could not expand NOG to include more of the trade 100 hours that you said of welding?
We could have, but you'd have to change law to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, you could make it cover.
That's what I was
You
trying
can make it cover whatever you wanted, but.
Well, I just didn't know for some reason if there was some legal reason that it was tied to Pell.
No.
Okay, sorry, just, that's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir. Dr. Susan Fritz, Interim President, University of Nebraska, to discuss the Nebraska Opportunities Grant, who they are part of the program that Mr. Baumgartner oversees. Please.
Oh, my. They're low.
Good morning, Chairman Groney and members of the committee. With your permission, before I give my testimony, could I address the question that was asked
Which question?
about the university and the number of non-resident students who graduate and stay in the state?
Yes, you may.
So with the assistance and partnership of the Department of Labor, we were able to match graduate outcome information for students who are 5, 6, and 7 years out. We did this just this last spring, and we were able to determine that of those students in those cohorts, 5, 6, or 7 years later, 30% of them were employed in Nebraska. Similarly, because I think this is a natural follow-up, we also learned that 70% of our resident students were still employed in Nebraska. And the reason that we were doing that is that study is twofold. Of course, we wanted to answer those questions, but secondarily, we were testing our capability to match data as part of our intention to move forward with the longitudinal data system.
Quick clarification on that, but the 70 to 30 don't equal 100%, because 70% of 100,000 kids versus 30% of 10,000 out of state. We still have a net out migration of graduates.
Technically, I would want to look at those numbers before I agree completely with that, but the 70 and 30, of course, we're talking about two different buckets.
Subsets of
Certainly.
people. Thank you.
And if there are no follow-ups, I'll go ahead with my testimony.
You already spelled your name.
No, I did not. I am Susan Fritz, S-U-S-A-N, F-R-I-T-Z, and I am interim president of the University of Nebraska. I'm pleased to be here today to talk about the critical importance of financial aid for our 51,000 students, and I thank you for your attention on this topic. The Nebraska Opportunity Grant Program, part of the Education Improvement Fund, is the state of Nebraska's only need-based financial aid program for post-secondary education. Nebraska Opportunity Grant provided almost $19 million this year to low-income Nebraska students attending colleges and universities in our state. A little over $10 million of that went to students at the University of Nebraska. These dollars are crucial in removing barriers and making higher education more affordable and accessible for Nebraska students. We are grateful that state policymakers have recognized the needs of our students and have invested accordingly. Your foresight in directing lottery funds to the Nebraska Opportunity Grant Program has helped us put a college degree within reach of thousands of Nebraska students. It is more important now than ever for us to fulfill our commitment to access for the people of Nebraska. Accessibility has always been core to the university's mission, and we have been able to deliver on that promise thanks in part to your partnership. Looking ahead, keeping the doors of higher education open for our young people will be critical as we work together to address urgent workforce challenges facing our state. We are mindful that the financial needs of our students exceed the limited dollars available. In 2017-18, 13,000 of 36,000 eligible Nebraskans received Nebraska Opportunity Grant funding. About 4,500 of 12,000 eligible University of Nebraska students received funding, about 37.5%. Overall, Nebraska is in the bottom 10 nationally in state-supported grant aid per student. The average award for a NOG recipient at the university is about $2,000. Our students would tell you unequivocally that a grant of that size makes an enormous difference. Most of our Nebraska Opportunity Grant recipients have family incomes of less than $40,000, so financial aid matters. Of course, when it comes to accessibility, colleges and universities have a responsibility to do our part by keeping costs down for students and families. We are proud that our tuition and fees are well below the peer averages. We also have a number of efforts underway to expand access, including collaborative partnerships with our colleagues in higher education, government, and business to grow our retention rates, improve time to degree completion, limit student debt, and enrich the overall student experience. I would welcome the opportunity to talk more about those if you have questions. And we have and certainly will continue to leverage a mix of campus, federal, and private sources to reduce costs of our students to the greatest extent possible. More than a quarter of our students receive a federal Pell Grant, which for many is the foundation of financial aid. Additionally, we benefit greatly from the generosity of our donors, who through the University of Nebraska Foundation provide some $25 million in financial aid to our students each year. But the state's aid program is a crucial component. Your investment sends a message to our young people that the state of Nebraska cares about their success, that it is invested in their upward mobility, and that it wants to help them become engaged and productive citizens who contribute to our communities and economy. Furthermore, the state's partnership is one significant reason that we are able to produce 11,000 graduates each year who add a collective $2.4 billion to Nebraska's economy. The Nebraska Opportunity Grant Program represents a critical commitment by the state to our future. It helps keep college within reach for our young people. It creates opportunities for students in need, and it advances the state of Nebraska's goals for economic growth and well-being. The University of Nebraska is grateful for your support of access and success of our students. I would be happy to answer any of your questions.
Questions? Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Chairman Groening. Thank you for being here, President Fritz. Do our lower tuition rates at the university, does it, and this isn't on the university, this is on the student and parents taking out the loan, but I'm just wondering, did the lower tuition rates reflect a lower loan debt? And I wouldn't expect you to know that, but because it's pretty down in the weeds, but if we're lower in tuition, then you would think maybe, what I'd fear is, maybe it's not, because I don't know how, it's been a long time since I've looked at it, so I don't know how that all works, but if it's a set amount they get, regardless of what tuition. And, yeah, so it would be interesting if the lower tuitions reflect a lower debt level. Then the other thing, out of the 11,000 grads each year, well, let me go, wrong direction. In our, what do I want to call them? Your professional degrees, medical, nurses, law, dentist, do we, the percentage of those kids in grad school, or students, I shouldn't, they're adults by then, students, is that percentage, do we do better with out-of-state people there, or is it mostly Nebraskans? Could you get a breakdown of what our professional schools, like who goes to UNMC and becomes a doctor?
Certainly.
Mental health, we don't have, obviously, I know that they've got groups working on it there, but how many professional medical people are graduating from UNMC that are Nebraskans?
Senator, I'll be happy to get that for you. We have, I believe, 15 years of data in a fact book on our website, but we will send that to you, that link.
Okay.
For certain.
All right, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Anybody else? Senator Pansy Brooks.
I just wanted to just take two seconds to say thank you, President Fritz, for your leadership. I know your time is about to end, and I appreciate, and I know many of us appreciate the role you've played with grace and professionalism, and you have been a mentor to many young women who see you as someone to emulate and somebody who to whom they can aspire to be. So I appreciate the work that you've done, and I know many of us do, and thank you for your leadership and your vision, and you have not played a quiet role where you just sat back in your office. We really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very humbled by your comments. It's been a tremendous opportunity. Thank you.
I have a question. And thank you for not being controversial in any way. We had a peaceful time with the university here lately.
I can take little responsibility for that, Chairman Groney, but you're welcome.
I'm going to give you credit for it. We don't have kids in poverty driving from Illinois and enrolling at the University of Nebraska. They pretty much stay locally because of cost, right?
I would say that excuse me, Chairman, but I would agree with that as a conclusion, that's nationally, that would not be a trend we see.
Yeah, They have to live at home even to be able to go to school. But Pell Grants, higher education, the master's degrees, you can't get Pell Grants anymore, can you? Isn't it just the 4 years?
I'm not aware that that's possible. It's been, Pell Grants, in my knowledge, have been focused at the undergraduate level.
So then how do you determine, I asked the coordinating commission, but you have that answer, if you're getting a proportion of the money, you said 10 million, and you get those, I forgot the number, but you had quite a few applicants.
Yes.
How do you prorate that? How do you decide?
Well, so it's important, when I went to college, there was an admission date, and then financial packages were assembled. And institutions have gone to rolling admissions, and they also start to build those financial packages as students are admitted throughout that year. And so the money essentially gets used up in putting those packages together. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so important for our students that have tremendous financial need, that they need to be encouraged to apply as soon as possible to be on the front end to participate in that money. It just simply runs out.
So you decide with the money you get, how much you're going to give for each grant. And then that's how many students, you know the number of students you're going to give it to in advance.
Actually, what happens is they build financial packages within financial aid offices, and so
It
looking at...
varies.
Right, and so looking at try to cover as much need as possible, but pulling every lever available to them for that
It's not a set
individual
amount per
student.
student,
No.
as by need.
Right,
All right, that's,
right.
thank you.
Certainly.
Appreciate it. Any other questions from the committee? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Who's next? Now we have Dr. Jody Cupper with the Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs, Nebraska State College Systems, also talking about the excellence in teaching portion of the lottery money. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning, Chair Groney and members of the Education Committee. My name is Jody Cooper, Jodikupper. As Chair Groney said, I'm Vice Chancellor for Academic Planning and Partnerships, and I'm here today stepping in for Chancellor Turman, who is still up in Wayne as part of our board activities and was unable to be with you today. He did submit written testimony that has a good number of facts that I will be discussing today on how the continued use of lottery funding for the Nebraska Opportunity Grant and the Teaching Excellence programs positively impact students who attend the state colleges. In terms of the Nebraska Opportunity Grant, it's critically important to the students who come to the three state colleges. During the 2018-2019 academic year, just under 1,200 students, 1,198 Nebraska State College students, were awarded almost $1.4 million in NOG support. It comes down to about 1 in 5 of our undergraduate students who receive some sort of NOG funding. It's critical to addressing the amount of unmet financial need, and I've heard that discussed a little bit with Dr. Baumgartner's testimony. Basically, what each of our colleges does is it looks at the number of students who are Pell eligible at each of the colleges. It computes the cost of attendance for those students, what it will cost for them to complete that year of academic tuition, fees, and books. And then it subtracts all the Pell Grant financial aid loans that student has received. Once you take one amount from the other, $7.2 million of unmet financial need occurs at the state colleges. And the most interesting thing I found was that in the past 2 years, it's gone up over $2 million. We were just over $5 million 2 years ago, and in 2 years, we are at 7.2 for the number of students we support. So with that, that's the one part that I wanted to talk about for the NOG funding. We strongly support the continuation. It has a clear and meaningful impact to the students who come to the state colleges in terms of their ability to choose to come to college and continue to complete their degrees. We also receive funding, our students receive funding for both the Attracting Excellence and the Enhancing Excellence to Teaching programs that are funded through the Nebraska Department of Education. Over the past decade, a significant number of state college teacher candidates have been financially supported through these programs. And as you probably know, the scholarships do come with a loan forgiveness that incentivizes these students to remain in Nebraska and take a teaching position in one of the Nebraska schools. What we have found is over the past 3 years, the average total annual allocation of attracting and enhancing excellence program funding to our state, to all Nebraska institutions was just under 1.5 million. Of those funds, students majoring in teacher education at one of the 3 state colleges received an average of 21.6% of that funding, or $113,483 for attracting excellence, and about 18.4% of the total awards for enhancing excellence scholarships, which were $170,945. So this is an annual funding of around $285,000 per year for students in both undergraduate and graduate programs in teacher education across the 3 state colleges. For over a decade, those programs then have successfully placed teachers across the state following graduation. Recent data that I was able to look at from the Department of Education reflects that 81% of Nebraska State College students who received the Attracting Excellence Award successfully met the requirements for loan forgiveness by teaching in a Nebraska school, and 84% of state college students who received the Enhancing Excellence Award successfully met the requirements for loan forgiveness by teaching in a Nebraska school. So I think that strongly supports the idea that this sort of funding does incentivize individuals to remain in the state and take a job in one of our school districts. That's all I have to say. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of this information, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to address them.
Questions? Senator Leonard?
Thank you, Chairman Gurney. Are these you just said it, the teacher education, attracting excellence scholarship and enhancing excellence, are those both bachelor degree programs?
No, Attracting Excellence is undergraduate that's specifically focused on high-need endorsement areas. Enhancing Excellence usually supports those teachers who are going for an advanced degree. Could be curriculum instruction, ed admin, but programs that continue to enhance their success as a teacher.
So does it cover 100% if they're going for advanced degree? Is the loan forgiveness 100%?
Per year, what happens is there's an allocated amount, and for each year that a student receives a scholarship, it is forgiven by 1 year of teaching in a Nebraska school, or 2 years of a loan will be forgiven if you teach in a high needs school for 1 year. But it's 1 year scholarship is forgiven by 1 year of teaching, if that makes sense.
So what's the high needs? I mean, I have my definition, but there clearly must be a definition.
It's Nebraska Department of Education high needs, so it usually takes into account the data of that school district in terms of how it meets the high needs definition of the state.
Okay. So if you're getting a graduate degree with this program and you stayed in Nebraska, you basically, your graduate, you don't have to pay any tuition? I mean, in the long run, it's free?
The scholarship does not fully cover the tuition, but it contributes to it. I'm trying to remember if I had the amount, I could get back to that. But if you look at $285,000 across 150 students, I could try to quick do the math.
Well,
it's somewhere around probably $1,300.
So it's 150 students, is that what you said?
150 students average are provided funding of around $285,000.
Okay, that's very helpful.
I
Thank
didn't
you
do
very
the per
much.
student average.
Thanks.
You're just talking about the state colleges, but
yes,
1.4 million was when the Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund was distributed over the last 3 years. How much of that percentage would you, or in your experience, goes to attracting the low-income person to go into teaching versus the teacher already making $50,000, $60,000 getting a master's degree? What's the split?
That would be a good question for Matt. It's like a 40-60, and I want to say the 40% is enhancing and 60 is attracting, so undergraduate, but I don't remember.
60 attracting and 40 for the master's.
I think so, but I'm not certain. I'm not certain.
We'll find out.
Okay.
We'll find out, because it looks the reverse as to what, but anyway, we'll find out.
Okay. But it is in the language of the bill.
We heard NOG is underfunded, you need more applicants. What about this program? Are you turning applicants away, or are you out hunting for them?
The state colleges fill their allocated slots. That is decided by the number of teacher education completers that each institution submits for certification each year to Nebraska Department of Education, and then that bases the percentage of funding that goes to each post-secondary institution that has a teacher education program.
What I'm asking is, do you have applicants that apply for this, that are turned away
There are more applicants than slots, if that's what you're
in
asking.
the state college?
Yes.
And it's,
Actually, we benefit sometimes because once an institution does not fully fill their slots, they are then reopened. And the state college system has been notorious for benefiting from those unused slots at other
we used
institutions.
to call them teachers' colleges, didn't we? That's
Yep.
what the purpose was.
Yeah. So it's not surprising.
It's
that-
not surprising. Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you for your time this morning.
Now we have Greg Adams, Executive Director, Nebraska Community College Association, talking about gap assistance and from the college viewpoint.
Good morning, Senator and committee members. My name is Greg Adams, Greg, ADAMS, Executive Director of the Nebraska Community College Association. In light of the time and what you already heard from Mike Baumgartner about the GAP program, I'm going to deviate from what I thought I would talk about and maybe try to fill in some of the questions that you may have had. Nicole had asked me to speak about the GAP program, and that's fully what I intend to do and try to answer any questions that you have. It is exactly what it's described to be. It's to fill in a gap. If you're a Pell-eligible student and you're looking to get an associate degree at a community college, you're not GAP eligible. You're just not. When I knew that I was going to testify, I contacted all of the colleges and I said, give me some insight. What kinds of students are using the GAP program money? And I got pages of things. But in light of what I've heard, let me just pull out a few examples. For instance, at Northeast. At Northeast, they've had a number of students. The ones that they gave me, most of them are non-traditional students. 25, 28, 30 years of age, already with family obligations, already working full-time, that wanted to upskill themselves with a CDL license. Another one needed help preparing for a newly mandated test from the state for a pharmaceutical tech position that she already had. Single mother, needed help financially just to prepare for the test. At Southeast Community College, a young man from York, as a matter of fact, took an introduction to manufacturing class. He was low income and is now employed at Collins Aerospace, and he's working on a degree, he has decided. So as a result, he's Pell eligible, not GAP eligible, but better yet, Collins is paying for all of his education going forward, as long as he stays working there. And you may also remember an example that during the hearing on LB 180, this last legislative session, but the gal, 76 years old, whose husband passed away from cancer. She was a nurse, but had let that go. And when he passed away, she had a lot of medical bills, and at that age, needed to go back to being a nurse. She needed to take a refresher course. GAP money was used by Southeast Community College. She wasn't looking to get a new degree in anything or a new certification, pass a refresher course so she could be recertified as a nurse. And one other example I thought was good from Central Community College that was forwarded to me. I don't know, I had never heard of it, but the Western Alternative Corrections Program, there's one in Omaha and there's one in Hastings. But several parolees and folks on probation took a class in concrete, flat work, that offered by Central Community College, and the GAP funding was used to help them pay for the cost of that training. I hope in those examples you begin to see that for the colleges, we're dealing with a wide array of folks with all of our programs, but certainly with this one, from a high school student in York, Nebraska, to a 76-year-old gal who wanted to take a refresher course in nursing in order to pay bills, and everything in between. And that's what GAP is designed to do. Now, in all candor, and Senator Groney brought it up, Were we a little heavy on it in the beginning? Probably so when you look at the balances. But I think, and we can collect the data and find out, with the passage of 180, what happened was you further gave our colleges more flexibility. And now a 4-credit class, CNA, CDL classes, 4 credit, will now qualify for the gap funding, and I think you will see more usage. Otherwise, right now, looking at the balances, Senator Groney, you're right. But I think when you add credit to it, like you did in LB 180, you're going to see a real difference in the usage. With that, I would conclude and try to answer questions that you have.
Senator Lenahan.
Thank you, Chairman Gurney. So are the limits on who qualifies for GAP, even though it's now just for a refresher course, are they still the same as Pell?
Well, you have an income requirement, yes. Yes,
So
it's virtually the
it still
same
has
as
to be,
Pell.
it still has to be people who need the money.
Yeah, it's really the big distinction between Pell and GAP is the eligibility is still there. The difference is the kind of programming and the length of time of your programming. That's the big difference.
I just want to get ahead of something that somebody will, and I might even think this, it's not a situation, and now we've opened that door that you can basically offer those courses for free to anybody that comes. They still have to be
Oh,
qualified
yeah,
financially.
yeah.
Okay.
Have to be qualified for Pell, just like, yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
But they don't qualify for Pell because they're not a certified.
Because of the programming, you're right.
And if you took that money and stuck it in NOG, now you're competing, the little community colleges with less enrollment is going to have to split that with the University of Nebraska, that $1.4 million, because it's proportionally by student. And the community colleges would be left in the dust again, is that right?
Well, you know, we could say it that way, or what I'd really like
That's
to
the way I
say
talk.
is we've got some students,
Yeah.
like I just described before you were able to come in, Senator Groney, who wouldn't, they're not going to qualify for NOG because that isn't what they want. They want short-term training and something to upskill so that they can improve their plot in life.
And they can't afford a tank of
And they
gas to
can't
ride to
afford it.
Lincoln,
Many
Nebraska.
many of them are already working. They're working full-time, they have family obligations.
Single mothers.
This helps them. That's right.
Education opportunities closer to home.
And they stay at home. About 90% of our students.
And otherwise, if we dump this in a NOG, a kid at Westman would be in the same boat applying for this money as some kid who just wants to be a welder. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Which we need welders. Thank you. Senator Walls.
Thank you, Chairman Gurney. I just have a really quick question. Does it count for online classes if you were taking a class online? I suppose I could look and see, but.
I'd have to turn around and look at President Gottschall to make that determination, but I really.
I'm sure it could.
Okay.
It could, okay. Thank you.
Depends on the programming.
Sure. All right.
If it's flat work and concrete,
Right, yeah, I understand that, but, I mean, if there
Yeah.
was because people are working full-time.
Yes,
and
yes,
you need
exactly.
to have some flexibility, and if that helps.
Thank you, sir.
thank you, Senator.
Kobe Koash, Associate Executive Director, Nebraska Association of School Boards.
Thank you, Chairman Groney. Members of the Education Committee, for the record, I'm Colby Koash, C-O-L-B-Y-C-O-A-S-H. I'm the Associate Executive for the Nebraska Association of School Boards, and here to comment on, appreciate the opportunity to comment on the future of these lottery funds, and I'll keep my testimony focused on the funds that are going to the K-12 portion of the education spectrum. And in my testimony handed out, I've kind of broken down each program and as to where our members feel the value is for each one of them. And I'll start by discussing a little bit the Attracting Excellence in Teachers program and enhancing teachers. These are pretty important to our members. This program is because one of the most challenging things for school board members is to keep the workforce in their community, and this is one of the only tools in their toolbox to be able to do that, because this program hits, one of the requirements for this program is sparsity. And if a student is going into teaching and wants to teach in an area that is determined sparse by NDE, this can provide some loan forgiveness for them. But also, in some of those high-need areas, special ed is a good example of a certification that is difficult to fill for a lot of school districts. And this is across the board, because some of the requirements, not only sparsity, but also areas of high poverty as well. So it does hit both urban and rural, and of course, filling these positions is a challenge across the state. So we really encourage the continued funding of that program. Likewise, the Expanded Learning Opportunities Grant Program has been a success in large measure, because it's a collaboration that we've seen successful outcomes for our students. They truly have a statewide reach, and I know Nicole has provided you with where these grants have been allocated, and they've been in places like Lincoln and clear out into Garden County as an example of where these Expanded Learning Opportunity grants have been utilized. The innovation grants, a couple of comments on those. As I listened to Mr. Bloomstead about the need to kind of expand those and to work with those grants to get more of a network, we would agree with him on that. We recommend that the more flexibility you can provide within them and help them scale to districts makes a lot of sense. We would also agree with NDE that the portion that's being removed for the statewide ACT testing, we do think that ought to be part of the mainline budget. I mean, if it's an important initiative that every 11th grader be tested in an ACT, we ought to fund that through general funds. And I would encourage the state and this committee to continue to articulate a policy purpose for that statewide testing, so we know to what end that testing is supposed to guide us. Finally, I'll mention that the reallocation of these funds does present an opportunity for the legislature through this committee to address some issues that educators and administrators and school boards have all identified, namely training of classroom educators in mental health needs of students and crisis intervention techniques for educators. And I was going to point out that there are two bills that you've already heard this in 2019 that have tried to address that. One of them specifically through lottery funds, LB 568, which was brought by Senator Moorfeld to provide for some mental health first aid training, and also LB 351, which originally was a bonding authority bill to provide for some violence prevention initiatives for schools, and also for some cybersecurity remediation. Understandably, more bonding authority isn't palatable all the time, but those two concepts could easily be rolled into lottery funds. And so if you want to go back and look at two initiatives that the Education Committee have spoken about, those are two that I would encourage you to take a look at. And finally, I'd be remiss if, as kind of one of the only K-12 representatives invited to testify today, that when the lottery funds were initially allocated, there was a more equitable balance between K-12 and higher ed. That balance has shifted a little bit, and repurposing these funds for the next 5 years does give the Education Committee the opportunity to take a look at that balance between K-12 and higher ed as you present that to the full legislature. I thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Any questions? So what we see, which is that 28% of the funds basically go to K-12, and the other 72 go to higher education.
Yeah,
The Constitution just uses the word education, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And prior to the change in 2015, it was closer to a 50-50 split. And the change in 2015 really balanced it more heavily on the post-secondary side.
And you have needs.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. That ends the hearing on lottery funding. And we have a lot of work to do over the next month and a half to, and I'm sure we'll be talking to a lot of the parties involved. So thank you.